Hello and welcome to another screencast, this time in motivation. Just a reminder in regards to these PowerPoints, so the yellow text boxes refer to the tasks for students, the green text boxes are note-taking text boxes for students, the blue text boxes are the differentiation tasks, and the red text boxes are the teaching and learning strategies and ideas for teachers. So for this specific topic in regards to motivation, you need to be aware of two definitions, okay, specifically in regards to intrinsic and extrinsic motivation. You need to be able to have some different examples of types of intrinsic and extrinsic motivation, be able to link them to different sporting examples, and then evaluate the benefits, the merits of intrinsic and extrinsic motivation on sport. So let's get going. First and foremost, what is motivation? So motivation is this drive to succeed or the desire to achieve something. Okay, so we're inspired to actually achieve something. That's what we mean by the word motivation. So just want you to pause your video first and foremost, and I want you to think about, why is motivation important for a sporting athlete? Okay, so hopefully you've come up with a few ideas in regards to what is important, or why motivation is important for a sporting athlete. And ultimately, when we think of motivation, we want that, we want to achieve something, we want to have that aspiration to achieve something. So ultimately, it helps with our focus, it helps with our concentration as a sporting athlete if we're motivated to achieve something. Not only that, if we're motivated to achieve something and we've got that internal desire, we're inspired to do something well, then ultimately we're going to normally perform more accurately. Okay, and that's because motivation relates to arousal levels. We think of that word arousal, sporting arousal, we're talking about this state of readiness and alertness. And ultimately, if we've got that motivation and we feel ready, we feel alert in regards to our performance, then it's likely that our performance is going to be more accurate. So let's look at intrinsic motivation first and foremost. So the intrinsic motivation basically refers to the drive that comes from within. Okay, so we're talking about that internal desire from within us, okay, to achieve something. It brings about different feelings, doesn't it? So again, pause your video here and think about, what are some examples of intrinsic motivation? So hopefully you've come up with a few different examples in regards to intrinsic motivation. Ultimately, think of that athlete who has maybe run or jogged towards the top of the mountain, top of the cliffs, got a nice view obviously, but that gives them a sense of pride, gives them a sense of satisfaction. So when we achieve something in sport, we get satisfaction, don't we? Okay, we've achieved what we've intended to achieve, so ultimately we feel pride, we feel a sense of accomplishment, and we have a good feeling of self-worth. So all of those things are examples of intrinsic, so within the performer. Opposite of that, if we look at extrinsic motivation, is we're talking about the drive to perform well or to win in order to gain some sort of external reward. Okay, so when we achieve something, yes, we can feel good about it, yes, we can get satisfaction, but within sport, okay, when we think of when we're playing sport in particular, okay, what are we doing it for? Yes, because we want to win ourselves, but ultimately we're trying to get something out of it that might be an external reward. So pause your video here. You can use the example in terms of the picture as one example. Think of other examples of extrinsic motivation. So you should have hopefully got from the picture in particular, okay, the aspect of a trophy, okay, and trophy or certificates or medals will normally be referred to as tangible rewards. That means they're things that we can see, things that we can feel, okay, so they're visible kind of objects, as in essence. So things like certificates, trophies and medals, okay, will be all part of sport. If we achieve something, we normally get that, don't we? They are tangible rewards. Intangible rewards are the opposite of that. They are invisible things, things we can't touch, things we can't necessarily feel. Okay, so there'll be things like praise, there might be feedback from other people, it might be a round of applause. Okay, so ultimately, yes, we can see a round of applause, but it's intangible, isn't it? Okay, we can't actually physically hold it. Okay, so ultimately, okay, extrinsic, remember, is external. Okay, so it's away from the body now. Okay, so it's normally from other people. Okay, it's normally something that we achieve. Okay, and we gain obviously externally to us. So let's look at the evaluation of motivation. So why is motivation important in sport, and some of the and how it links to performance. So ultimately, okay, the research that's come out in terms of sporting research, educational research, basically concludes that intrinsic motivation is more powerful than extrinsic motivation. So the internal motivation within us is actually more powerful than extrinsic. Okay. Ultimately, if we have too much extrinsic motivation, so if we're playing too much for rewards, for prizes, for things like money, okay, then ultimately as performers we can become too reliant on that, okay, so that we forget about maybe playing for the love of the sport, okay, and we forget about the feelings of satisfaction because ultimately we're just trying to get that reward. So intrinsic motivation is more likely to lead to continued effort and participation. If we feel good about ourselves, if we have a good self-worth, for example, then ultimately that's going to help us want to continue that performance again and again. And it says there that overuse of extrinsic motivation can undermine the strength of intrinsic motivation. So just think about that for a minute. If we provide too many rewards, too many prizes, okay, that ultimately might actually reduce our intrinsic motivation. Okay, so if I'm getting too much money, or if I'm getting too many awards and prizes, okay, and they're just coming a little bit too frequently for me, then all of a sudden I'm just thinking, well, what's the point? Okay, yeah, that's another trophy. Yeah, that's more money. Fantastic. But ultimately, that's going to reduce my desire to win just for my internal feelings. So we've got to be careful. Extrinsic motivation is important, okay, and is useful and is really good and can be really good for us in terms of creating extra motivation for a performer, but we've got to use it sparingly. Okay, we can't use too much of it ultimately. Again, pause your video here and think about this question. How can extrinsic rewards, how can they boost intrinsic motivation? So think about that question for a minute and we'll see if we can answer it. Okay, so before we go back to looking at the question then on how sort of extrinsic rewards can boost intrinsic motivation, let's look at this question because it might help us out with it as well. Okay, so again, pause your video here, evaluate the use of a trophy as a form of extrinsic motivation. So let's see what you've come up with in terms of an answer here. So hopefully you've mentioned about the fact that a trophy in this situation, in this example, is given out maybe once a year. So it's not being overused, so it doesn't undermine, it doesn't get rid of intrinsic motivation, okay? Because as the question asks, the winner of an FA Cup Super League, they've won a trophy at the end of the season, so it only comes once a year. We may have mentioned about the fact that the feeling of pride, accomplishment over a long season to win the trophy may well be as an effective motivator. Okay, so ultimately, obviously, winning that trophy, okay, can bring about the fact of pride. It can bring about the fact of accomplishment, okay, over the course of the season by winning that trophy. We can mention about the fact that the extrinsic reward of the trophy combined with intrinsic drive can also work well. So intrinsic and extrinsic motivation can work well together. Not only that, the trophy on its own might not be a big enough motivator for some of the individuals. Okay, so just by winning that trophy, that might not be the biggest motivation for them. Okay, part of their motivation will come from them internally. And the final point, it says that intrinsic motivation, so our internal drive, is generally deemed to be more powerful than extrinsic, as we've said before. So performers will still need intrinsic motivation, so not only the trophy, okay, and that's an important point to mention as well when we're evaluating that aspect as well. Finally, in terms of the teaching and learning strategies for this section, okay, a few things that you could do. I like to obviously do occasionally some thinking hard tasks. So where you maybe write down 5 or 6 keywords and get the students to pair up the words, or decide which one have got the strongest links and as to why. You can also look at the negative impacts as well, which ones are negatively linked together and why. And then this idea of a raffle ticket. Okay, so this takes a little bit of time, but getting some raffle tickets, you hold on to one of the tickets, you give away the tickets to students when they answer questions in your lesson. You may pick 4, 5, 6 students who don't participate, okay, who aren't allowed to participate, in fact, or at least they don't get a raffle ticket. And at the end of it, okay, then you can create a big raffle, and one of the students with the correct number, whichever one you pick out of the hat, for example, maybe wins a prize. But then relate it to motivation. So those raffle tickets, that's the tangible reward, perhaps, isn't it? That's the tangible aspect of extrinsic motivation. They can feel that ticket, okay, and ultimately the prize that comes from whichever one's been selected from that raffle ticket is that tangible reward. Okay, how did the students feel, the ones that weren't allowed to take a ticket or collect a ticket? Okay, they're only motivated maybe from their intrinsic motivation. Okay, so quite useful for students to remember that, and they kind of remember this topic through examples like that.